Welcome to Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host, Deborah Bailey. When I started this podcast in 2008, I was on a mission to promote women business owners, creatives, and entrepreneurs. In each episode, my guests provide resources, valuable tips, and inspiration. Women Entrepreneurs Radio is about showing women how to harness their natural strength to achieve success on their own terms. Did you know that you can find the Women Entrepreneurs Radio podcast on many podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube also? If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to share your feedback and a review. 5 stars is always great, because the more that you share your feedback, the easier it will be for the show to be found by more listeners. So I hope you'll take a moment to do that. And as well, you can stop by the blog, womenentrepreneursradio.com, and you can find extended bios of the show guests and articles and announcements of interest to women business owners. So please make sure you stop by the blog and also subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Oh, wait, before you go, you can also stop by dbaileycoach.com to find out more about my nonfiction books and about my online writing courses for fiction authors. And dbaileycoach.com/brightbooks is where you'll find my paranormal and fantasy romance novels. And now, let's get started with the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host, Deborah Bailey, and I'm so glad that you could join us today. So I am going to introduce my guest, Ameé Quiriconi, and she's the founder of Activity Girl, LLC. She works with leaders and organizations on connecting their business strategy with hiring, engagement, and creating toxic-free cultures through the use of people, data, and trauma-informed practices. She hosts a mental health podcast called One Broken Mom and is also the author of The Fearless Woman's Guide to Starting a Business. What every woman needs to know to be a courageous, authentic, and unstoppable entrepreneur. So welcome to the show, Ameé.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here.
We're going to be talking about self-sabotaging behaviors and things. So could you please start by sharing with us how you got started in the work that you do?
Self-sabotaging myself constantly is how I ended up eventually where I'm at. I've been an entrepreneur. It seems like most of my life, it goes all the way back to being a kid and trying to sell poems for $5 a piece to my classmates in middle school. But in the course of getting my college education, I ended up with an engineering degree. I went into engineering school and came out and practiced for several years in the Seattle area. And, Seattle ended up adopting green building standards back in the early 1990s, and they were one of the first communities in the country to actually do that. And that was something I wasn't familiar with design-wise. And so I started to go back and get more education in that. And in the course of doing that education, one of my classes, I got a master's degree, and it was an economics class, and I wrote a paper about a business plan for a process to use a recycled building material. And that started me on like the biggest journey of entrepreneurship ever, which was, this business plans. Like I just told myself, like, if this is such a great idea, then why isn't anybody literally doing it? And so then I decided to just do it. So I started a recycled content countertop company in my garage, and then grew it into a full-scale manufacturing facility and nationwide distribution. And I ran that for many years. And then the recession hit, and that's when I really started to experience a lot of stress and pain and suffering in the business world. But really it was also where the self-sabotaging really got a hold of me, and we'll definitely be talking about what that looks like. And it started another career path for me for another 7 years. I got out of the construction manufacturing field and I ended up finding myself, in the wedding industry, like almost like, I mean, if you talk about a 180, you go from a blue collar industry all the way over to the wedding industry, which is predominantly a pink collar industry, mostly employed, and ran with women. And I did that for 7 years and found myself, at the end of that in a pretty much the same situation. Here I was losing a business. I was losing a personal relationship and I was flat broke. And that's when I realized that this wasn't bad luck. I wasn't cursed, that I was doing something here. Like as much as I, hated to admit it, I was the architect behind what was happening to me. And that then started the most important journey of my life, which was the one really worrying about myself and not worrying about coming up with the next business idea or the next creative plan. And so intensely focusing on my well-being, my role and relationship with being a mother to my 2 kids. I made a lot of, amazing and as well as horrifying discoveries of things that I wish I'd known that I didn't know, but that's okay because we don't know what we don't know. And through the course of that, I started to see relationships behind, childhood trauma, dysfunction growing up, the effects of that on our brain architecture, neuroscience, psychology, and then how that manifests in our life, not only in parenting and personal relationships, but also in business and entrepreneurship. And so then the intersection really became very clear to me. I've always been passionate about businesses. I love businesses, but I also really love seeing people happy. I love seeing people successful, and realized that there was an opportunity for me to be able to help other people, begin to understand how despite our best intentions, we can actually be our worst enemy. And so that's how I ended up starting my consulting practice under this new umbrella of using data and psychology and real life and depth and, helping make workplaces and entrepreneurs just better so that we can be happier.
Wow. That's, that's some transition from what you were doing, originally.
Yeah, it's a big pivot. Like I pivoted a lot. I played basketball in high school, so I'm used to pivoting. So.
But that's so fascinating because a lot of times I think that people think, well, I'm doing this one thing. That's all I can ever do. And they don't realize that that's not really the case. They have other options, and maybe what it is about them, their skills or interests can also be applied in different places.
Yeah.
I think often it's because we're kind of conditioned to believe that we can't follow that path. If we choose one path and that's it forever. And that's a really great example. That's not true.
Right. And it's not like it's an easy way to do it, but I don't think it's easy staying in the same path if it doesn't feel good.
Right.
That seems harder to me, honestly. So.
Right. I think to some degree we're seeing the effects of that right now with, things I'm seeing, mentioned articles and things about people not really wanting to continue in certain lines of work. Different areas are like, where are the people? Why aren't they working? It's like, they don't want to go back to that.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's quite a shakeup going on, I think, that people really don't know what to do with. But we're going to get more into the self-sabotage and those behaviors. And when it comes to that, you were saying that you had that in your own life, and where did you have that applied? Where do you see that happen for you?
Well, I have to start with this statement here after, working with entrepreneurs like you, coaching and working with businesses. The reality is that entrepreneurs are fueled by being uncomfortable. At some point in time, we felt, a pull, a tug, whatever it was, because we didn't like the way something was working. We thought we could do something better. Maybe sometimes I see people go into entrepreneurship because they need more money. They want to be free of whatever their situation is that they're in, whether it's they want the freedom to choose their own schedule. They want the freedom to travel, spend more time with their family, whatever it is. But again, it's that state of being pushed and then it inspiring us to make some sort of big leap. And, an entrepreneurship is a risk, right? But if we don't have a handle on that motivation, then we could be doomed to continue to find reasons to be uncomfortable. so that we have reasons to come up with a new solution in there. And, and for me, one of the biggest challenges that I experience that I see a lot of people do, and it goes back to being raised in dysfunction and with trauma was, I took and allowed too many bad behaviors from people around me slide. I didn't have a very good system for eliminating people that were going to be, really difficult to work with. Also that had corruptible morals when it came to doing business, because I was used to being around that like all the time. So when you grow up like that, you think that that's how everybody is, and you don't have any other models for you that you don't have to tolerate that because you had to tolerate it. So you feel like you're actually groomed to handle the worst of the worst, right? And unfortunately, that is a form of self-sabotage that we don't think of, because the self-sabotage is you thinking that you can fix this other person, you thinking that you can work extra hard to overcome their deficiencies and that somehow the scales will all balance out. And the reality is that we can't change or fix anybody else except ourselves. And the more work that you do to try to make a better situation or a bad situation better, the more work that those kind of people will continue to do to undermine your efforts. And then eventually it's going to fall apart. And that was one of the biggest things that I dealt with, choosing business partners that I wasn't in alignment with, overlooking bad behavior, not having accountability or boundaries set around it, and eventually seeing really great things fall apart because they were apt to do it. But then telling myself, don't worry about it. You can do this. You can bounce back. You can move on. And that's when I needed to say, no, I need to stop making the decision in the beginning to do business or to allow certain people in my life, because I don't want to keep rebuilding just because I can. And so that would be, one of the bigger ones. But, the other thing that, I work with a lot of, women, but men actually suffer from this too, which is also undervaluing ourselves, being really uncomfortable with the dollar amount for what it is that we have to bring to the world. And again, if the history that you have has a role in your life, and in my case, I was the oldest daughter and I had a mom who didn't want to mom. So she took her oldest daughter, who was highly capable and intelligent and acted older than her age, and put her in charge. And so then we learn that there's a lot of these other jobs that we have to carry on in life that we'll never get paid for. And if if I ever asked, can I be paid for babysitting here? I was told no, that that these skills, values, and things that I contributed weren't worth anything. And that does actually end up writing itself into our belief system about our own sense of value. And it made it really challenging for me. While I could price product and I could run a business, when it came to making sure that I was getting paid and that I was being paid fairly, I withered. I couldn't do it. Like, my gut felt sick at the idea of, having somebody be upset with me because I was asking to be paid, because I'd been told so many times in my life that it wasn't worth anything. My contribution wasn't worth anything. And that's a form of self-sabotage, because you can't sustain yourself in this world, and you can't sustain your business if everybody else is making money and you're not. Like, you're eventually just going to get burned out and worn out, and you're never going to be able to achieve, these goals that you have for yourself, And I think that those are, like I said, those are some of the two biggest ones that I suffered from, that I really had to spend some time working on and changing for myself, that I see other people struggle. So the struggle isn't just mine alone. I know that.
And that's true. I think a lot of it, as you're saying, is having the boundaries in place. And if you've grown up a certain way, particularly, or conditioned in a certain way, then you're not going to really see the issue, or you're going to think, well, I shouldn't say anything. That's the way it is. And then it just goes on and on. And I think, as we maybe touched on a little bit, that also applies when people are doing a certain kind of work. They may really hate what they're doing or dislike it, but they keep doing it because, well, they're paying me, or I've been here such a long time. What I used to hear is, well, I can't start over.
Mm-hmm.
Did that ever, in the transitions that you made in your work, did you ever come across that feeling that, well, how can I start over?
Yeah. funnily enough, I feel like having life experiences where I started over a lot. I was a young girl who ended up going to 14 different schools between kindergarten and my senior year in high school. Mm-hmm. So my life was about starting over every 1 to 2 years, and this is what happens sometimes when you live in poverty. You have to go live with family members. You got to go, your lease is up and you got to go find someplace else to live. And, you're in another school district and just over and over and over again. So, I always knew wherever I started over again, I was going to be fine. And that's also one of the things that made it harder for me to be aware of being choosier with my actions, because even if it failed, I believed it didn't matter because I'd be able to start over. And so I never really had that fear. It's not like I enjoyed it. Sometimes I would start off and I'd be like, this is it. Like, this last personal relationship, this is the last one I'm going to have. I'm never doing this again. Well, it was the worst one I've ever had. So of course I had to end it, because just the idea that no, I don't want to have to do this all over again, but I also don't want to continue in something that's very poisonous to my system, and I know that some people, I get how some people would actually feel very comfortable in their set ways. And that's part of the people data that I look at when I work with people is, our experiences and our natural temperament do make us all wonderfully individual and different. And just because I am really comfortable with do-overs, I totally get that there are people whose comfort level and safety is actually in the repetition and the consistency of the same thing day in and day out. Like there's a sense of control for them. And so then when you're asking them to do something that's different from that, they're running off of a fear of, then I lose my certainty that I have. And it's scary for me to think of, that uncertainty. And I feel bad, I truly do when people, when any of us are governed by our fears, but it's also understandable. We don't know what's going on in everybody's lives, and we don't know what's really happening, that could be causing them, that type of anxiety. But yeah, for me, like I said, I almost got I've been too comfortable with the do-over, and that's great for resilience, but it's also, again, really bad because I call it the Phoenix delusion, which is the idea that, I do know that I can rebuild, but when you get so comfortable with the rebuild, you put yourself in a cycle of always starting over, and starting over means sometimes you lose everything and then you have to build back up again. And where do? You fall behind financially, and that's what happened to me. It was like, that's the one I got tired of redoing. Like I'm tired of starting over and being flat broke, like, cause that's scary as the older I get, and I have 2 kids. I can't afford to, to keep doing that over and over again.
Yeah, that's a good point too. When you think about it, it's not just a matter of, I'm just going to start fresh and jump into this or that, but it's also really being honest about everything else that you'd have to rebuild. And it's not always something that you may want to do or be in a position to do, each time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's a lot certainly to really keep in mind with that. Do you think that self-sabotage really, we were talking about boundaries and those kinds of things, but do you think it's also that someone isn't really, or they undervaluing themselves and what they can do at the root of a lot of this?
It can be. I mean, our belief systems go back really pretty deep, and sometimes we don't even know all of our own belief systems, right? Like it's not like somebody printed out a sheet of paper and said, this is what you believe in. We stumble into our belief systems, accidentally sometimes. And sometimes they're, voices in our head that we think is ours, but, actually could just be the echo of something we were heard or told or we saw played out in front of us in our lives. And so, again, if you, a lot of people, and that's the thing that I always talk about when I go out and I speak and and I teach and I train and stuff, is that most of us have some degree of a dysfunction or adversity somewhere in our background that has shaped us in a way that we survived it at the time, but now it may not be, or that survival response may not be serving us today as an adult. And so when I talk about with trauma, trauma isn't just the big things that we all think of, like what happened in Miami today. Like that's traumatic for those people and those families down there with the collapse of that condo. It's traumatic being, physically abused or sexually abused growing up, or, watching, losing a parent, that dies or something like that. Those are definitely traumatic experiences. But a lot of us also grow up in a constant state of toxic stress because of scarcity due to poverty, due to divorce repetitively, due to neglect, emotional neglect, like I said, not having parents that connected with you or understood you or forced you to do things that you didn't want to do or didn't believe in. And all those things end up then creating, a bunch of beliefs in our heads. And I do think that, sometimes we just don't think we deserve better, and that can come out in money, and that can come out, like I said, in my relationships with, allowing really honestly bad people in my life because I just didn't know better, but I also just didn't think that I deserved better. And when you don't think that you deserve better than what you get, then you're going to keep repeating it. So because as soon as you get something better than what you think, or that you probably do deserve, we find a way to drag ourselves back down. And it's not like we go, man, it's getting really good. It's time for me to mess this up. That never happens. That never crosses our mind.
Right.
We do it in other sneaky ways. We procrastinate. We put off work we know we should do. We say yes to one more thing when we know we should have said a no. We betray ourselves, in so many different ways so that we end up staying at that status quo of what we believe is the best that we deserve.
Yeah, that happens a lot in many areas of life.
It does. Right? Personal relationships.
Yes. That's a big one. That's a big one. When someone is just assuming that this is going to end up the same as maybe some other disappointments or heartbreak. And then they do the things that will help to make that happen. Even if it's unconscious, there's behaviors there that happen that now are kind of pushing away this thing that you want. But the fear that it's going to be like whatever else it may have happened that wasn't so good really starts to take over. And, I definitely think that happens with people in terms of their work or their business, because, I think that when you're doing a business and you have this passion, you have all these ideas for things, you put them out there, a lot of it really connects with you as a person, as opposed to sometimes being in the workplace where you may have a little distance between what you're doing and how you personally feel about yourself. There seems to be it's a personal commitment with it that I think sometimes people feel more connected to it than they may in a job where maybe they show up, they do their job, and they can put that boundary, or sometimes we do. But I think a lot of times having a business, it really can put you out there as a person, and what you really feel is out there now.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Because it's creation. It's us, showing up at a job is somebody handing you a task list and you just repeating back what you're supposed to do. It's like going to school, right? Like we're all trained to do that. Like we're programmed to do that. But entrepreneurship and starting our own business, it is truly an extension of who we are. And it does become personal. And that's why I think that some entrepreneurs really struggle again with the financial part of it. Because not necessarily because they can't add and subtract and do the math, but the, being connected to the outcome and the dollar amount that they're going to make and what they're going to ask. I mean, you basically are saying, listen, I'm bringing this idea to the world, whether it's jewelry or services or, selling used cars, whatever it is that you've decided you're going to do, and you're going to come out into it. And now you're asking for feedback from the world. What do you think? Am I good enough? Am I good enough for you? Am I valuable enough for you? What do I need to do to make you, want to do business with me and like me? And those are all very personal feelings. And sometimes we end up making, personal decisions that should be business decisions. But you know what? It's understandable because this is a creation, of our own design. And it's hard to not be, committed to it and really involved in it. And, and I've seen people over the years that would come to me, would-be entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. And they come in with this idea. And what they were all hoping would happen is that I would just buy their idea. Like they could just make $1 million off of me for buying this thing they came up with over the weekend. And I'd be like, you know what, man, if you really want to see this come to market, you're going to have to be pretty passionate about it because no one's going to believe in it as much as you are. Like, right? And you're going to have to take that passion and you're going to have to make other people believe in it as much as you believe in it. And if you can't convince other people that you actually care about it, why should anybody else care? I mean, and that's kind of the core, that creating, your business out there. And that if you're not committed to that level, businesses that have half a spirit behind it do not do as well as the ones that, your entrepreneur, your leader, your self-employed, business owners thrown themselves into. And so, yeah, I mean, I totally see that more so when it all lands on your shoulders, you have all the responsibility, especially if you have people that work for you. My gosh, that's like, even if you're not a parent, you just became a parent once you decided to start a company and have other people's lives in your hand. Like that's how, involved it can be. And if it's not involved and you're not into that part of it, well, just go get promoted in upper management at someone else's company because, that's the difference, I think between the real entrepreneurs and the ones that, again, like the idea of the business, like some of the freedoms maybe it can give it, but they aren't really into all of the aspects of it, which can be like a roller coaster ride, no matter what.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Also you're saying about having the passion and all that. And I think sometimes that transition for people from the workplace can sometimes be really tough because they have the passion that brought them out. Maybe if they've already left their job or they, for some reasons, lost their job and they're like, I'm going to do this thing. But then it's like really having the belief in that thing that you're creating that you can go and make the pitch or the sale or however you're putting it out there. And I think sometimes that can trip people up because then they're afraid to put themselves out there because, again, the fear that, oh, this isn't going to work. They're going to reject me. Maybe I believe in it, but, how can I get them to see it? I think that can also really trip us up and sabotage us as well.
Mm-hmm. I've seen lots of people with great ideas that I've coached myself that that's the biggest hurdle. It is the marketing, and when I started my agency back in 2017, it was actually originally doing marketing services and branding and business development, help for small businesses. And it evolved into this, this newer version, of what I do today. But it was I still did the same work. I'd sit down with somebody. I was like, well, let's look at your social media plan. Okay. And we got it all planned out. Why isn't it happening? Let's talk about that. Well, I don't feel real comfortable about going in and talking to this, dealer down the street that could be selling my product. I feel really insecure about that. Okay. Well, then let's work on that. Let's spend our time and energy because if we can focus and undo that, then the rest of this is going to be so easy. Planning is really easy. And that's why I evolved, my own practice and my own work that I do is because, there are so many really talented people that have these, these hangups, these hurdles, this voice in their head that's talking them out of doing anything that, I think of it as like, it's not fair. Those voices were planted because of experiences beyond our control. It wasn't our fault what happened to us. And I bring, I always want to talk about our past in that compassionate way of like, man, it's okay that you're like that. That's understandable, but here's what we can do. And sometimes it's not the falling in love with the, actual thing that you make or bring, but it's falling in love with maybe at a very deep, passionate level of what this business is going to bring you in your life. And when you see that, like, man, if I can really do this, make this happen, then I'm going to get the freedom, whatever that is, however you define it. Then you find the energy to do the things that maybe would normally trip you up or may not be as exciting, or you find yourself thinking like, is my future worth giving up? Do I love that idea more? Because if I do, you find ways to get through the hard stuff. Like that's the core of resilience, right? And that can be for people, I've seen this in the recession when it happened, so many people lost their jobs during the recession and they started their own businesses because the fear of having their future be uncertain again because their job was in someone else's hands and their ability to pay their bills and take care of their family was going to really be left up to someone else to decide one day they were no longer working for them. That alone was enough for people to go, that's why I want my own business. I never want to live in fear like that again. And that is a powerful motivator, and that can make up a lot for, not loving to do your own books, or, the fact of like, man, marketing's really hard. I'm really uncomfortable, but if I keep practicing it, I know the benefit is that I take care of this big important thing for me, which is to have my own security in my hands, for once and for all.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds as though there are times that people really don't trust it enough or how, whatever the reason is, that they just may give up before their dream gets to the point where now it's about to move forward because they figure, well, this isn't working. I can't do it. Whatever happens, that they just walk away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I see that too. Or sometimes people, again, go back to what I said at the beginning here. Entrepreneurs are fueled by being uncomfortable. And so sometimes the inspiration is I have a need I need to solve like right now. And I need to make this happen like tomorrow. And there is a patience part to entrepreneurship that you end up learning after you've tried and failed a few times. You realize that things don't happen instantly. Like there isn't a lottery ticket that you get. And so when people like sign up for a course and then they try to do 50% of the activities in the course and they expected to make their $1 million next week on their launch or whatever it is that they're doing, and then they don't, they quit. Mm-hmm. And it's because they were trying to take care of an immediate pain in their life. And they hoped that this was literally like a lottery ticket. And entrepreneurship is not a lottery ticket. Like it is far from, it's the opposite of lottery tickets. It takes money, time, and energy to do it. And it takes patience. And, again, when we're fueled and motivated by being uncomfortable by something in there, then that can get in the way. That can sabotage us because it makes us want things faster and to, put in half the effort or a quarter of the effort and think that the result is going to be the same as if we actually commit, slow ourselves down, take the time, follow the instructions, read the instructions before assembling. Mm-hmm. But if your pain is something that needs to be immediately addressed, entrepreneurship isn't going to answer it for you. It isn't. And so that's why I say that, if you're the type that starts and stalls and starts over again and over and over again, and you're on that cycle, nothing ever works for you. You have to stop for a moment and go back. What is it I'm really trying to solve here? And is actually entrepreneurship the vehicle to do that? Maybe I needed to make other changes in my life. Maybe where I'm living, who I'm living with, who I'm hanging out with, the job that I currently have. Maybe all of those are the things that I really need to look at and change, not just go sign up for the next business idea and then, not follow through on it and give up on it before I give it a chance to, to grow and develop into something.
Mm-hmm. Those are great points because I think, unfortunately, there's often a lot of ideas or things put out here to people to make them think that, well, if you just follow 1, 2, 3, it'll happen.
You'll be a millionaire by this weekend.
Right.
Yeah. I would love that. That'd be amazing if that really happened.
I'm sure you've seen a lot of that kind of thing that gets put out there that you'll have this kind of instant success. And it just seems like it's setting people up for an expectation that just isn't going to come together. And then they're just going to be frustrated and feel that they did something wrong when really this whole process has been simplified too much.
Yeah. And those are one of the things that like I love everybody that is doing their thing. Like, so I don't ever fault anybody for doing all of that. Mm-hmm. That's why I wrote the book that I wrote. And I say right in the very beginning of it, there are a lot of people that make success look really easy. And that book I didn't write that book. I write about why it's hard. Mm-hmm. And why it's hard is more common for most of us. Like we're going to have the ups and downs. We're going to have the struggles. We're going to have the hurdles. When people shorten the journey up too much and they make it look like, yeah, I started off poor and then now I'm a millionaire. And then they don't tell you like in the middle,
right.
how they got from 0 to that. And, how many times they were crying or, were broke or even sometimes, how much extra support they had that some people just don't have. Like I'm a single mom.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes I see some of these entrepreneurs and it's like, yeah, they struggle and all that. And I look at them and I go, yeah, but you know what? I don't mean to be mean or anything, but you got a partner there who's actually making sure that the bills are paid.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
There are some people out there that don't have that, and it is really hard to do that. And I'm not saying that that person's life is privileged or that much better, but whatever, you know, but we leave out too much of the real pain that, because, there's a shame at like, well, you know, of course I struggled with it, but that's not what I'm selling you on. I'm selling you on how amazing I am. Well, but you're setting up the wrong expectations for people.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I believe, like, if you really want people to succeed, I mean, be honest, you know, be truthful, and then show how to get through the rough spots, how to grab the sandpaper and sand it down, not just pretend it's not there.
That's the part that's never mentioned, that middle part. Never mentioned. It's like,
right.
And I wondered that myself. I think, once I started to realize, wait a minute, there's something missing here. And it's like, you know, yesterday I couldn't get money out of the ATM, but then, you know, instantly, I'm like, what happened in between? You know, I mean, you still had to pay your rent or whatever. So what did you do until?
Yeah. Yep.
That's the part that is never, ever quite there. And then that leads to frustration once you have tried those quick things. Cause I think a lot of times we all try that at some point because we feel that, oh, I have to do something. Oh, that sounds good. And then it doesn't come out that way. And then you're questioning yourself. But then as you see, over time, you realize, oh, okay, that is kind of an abbreviated timeline for what really has to happen. And then you start to realize, okay, it's a different process than I thought it. Yeah.
Yep. Totally. And, you know, and it's easy too that, like, you know, unfortunately what can happen is that if your expectations haven't been set up well, now you're stressed. And, you know, and here's the thing. This is the way the brain works. You're not thinking clearly when you're stressed. It's not even the same part of the brain. The part of the brain that's the smart part that comes up with logical decisions and can take facts and information and plan is not the brain that's running when you're stressed out. So when you're in a stressed mode, you know, and you're equally frustrated, then the results are even going to be weaker than if you're able to find a way to say, listen, I'm going to re-regulate here. I'm going to put this thing away. I'm going to, you know, figure out, you know, work on something else or whatever. And that's the other part of it is, you know, I think that too for people, especially like with me, you know, I made a lot of self-sabotaging decisions because I was in a period of like turmoil or stress or trauma happening at the moment. And entrepreneurship, unfortunately, is going to feed you some really tough moments, you know, and, you know, surviving it is learning to know when you're in that headspace and to be able to give yourself some grace and breathing room before you make the next decision or take the next step. Because, you know, if you're in survival mode, you know, you're trying to get out fast, right? You're either trying to run away fast or freeze or whatever our survival strengths are. And that means we need to get faster results or quicker results. And then we're more stressed out if we don't get to it. And again, if you're in this for the long haul, meaning that this is a vehicle to get you to a different life, you know, to elevate financially, whatever it is that you're looking for, you know, again, we all define success differently. It isn't the key to surviving the instant pain that you're in or the moment that you're in, you know, something else you got to do something else. You know, if you got a big problem to solve right now, solve that problem in a different way. Entrepreneurship, you know, isn't the quick fix.
That's a really great point to make because it does turn out that people feel that it, you know, that it is. If they, you know, if they're not familiar with it and what happens in it, then it really sounds like the thing to do. And if they're in some kind of a situation where they have lost a job or something's going on, of course, that looks like something I can grab onto. And so that's understandable that you would feel that way. But then often if it doesn't work out the way you thought or you've been told, then that adds more and more stress. And then it's just, really hard, as you said, to make decisions from that place.
Yeah. And it's human. You know, and for people that feel like, well, gosh, I wish I could, you know, well, welcome to the human race. You can't. None of us can. You know? Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So yeah, it's not anything to beat yourself up in particular because we all go through those things, I think. But Ameé, could you please let everybody know where they can find out more about you and your book?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I do a couple of things. One is, like you mentioned at the beginning, I have a mental health podcast that I've been doing since 2018 called One Broken Mom. And I want to mention that because some of the things that you and I talked about have to do with mental health, right? Mm-hmm. And so if anybody's listening and they want to kind of explore that part of it, then that's my resource that's out there. I interview experts and, honestly, some of the authors of the books that I've read, that have been just fantastic in my life. And I talk about mental health and I talk about our past, if we're parents, we talk a little bit about parenting, how it connects back to work and entrepreneurship that sometimes gets worked into personal relationships, basically the human experience and the deep and the ugly and the hopefulness, of all that. Mm-hmm. And then, the book, The Fearless Woman's Guide to Starting a Business, is available anywhere you buy books. So you can get it as an Audible as well. So if you love audiobooks and like listening to podcasts, then, the narrator is not me. It's a woman named Megan Tussing and she's amazing. Like it's so cool to listen to your own book read by somebody else. It feels like, a whole different experience. But the best place to just kind of see the whole scope of me, what I do, what I stand for is my website, ameéquiriconi.com. And then from there, obviously the links to me on LinkedIn, if you want to, talk business with me, Facebook page, Instagram, all that stuff can be found centralized there. There's blog posts, podcast episodes, and then a bit more about my consulting practice. If you're in the, working with a company or, have your own business that you want some support, in that capacity.
Yeah, that's a lot of good stuff. And I'm sure that people will definitely take advantage of that because, I was talking with another business owner and I had a couple of, podcasts about it. It's, about mental health and, during COVID, I'm not even sure we could call it after that. This one, I don't know. But just the stresses on people in general with something like this. And then on the business owners who've had this another layer of stress on them in terms of just maybe not even knowing what to do in these kind of situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's really, again, that's another very human response. When you look at most of us have been raised again with some dysfunction or adversity, most of us. And then you're saying, hey, let's talk about how to make our workplaces more emotionally safe. A lot of us don't even know how to start with ourselves. How do I make my own life emotionally safe? Because if I had that nailed, maybe I'd be doing better at business. And so that's really why I focus with trauma-informed practices is, it's working with business leaders and owners that are like, I want to do the right thing, but I really just don't know how. Like I struggle with it on my own. And I'm like the judgment-free, shame-free person, because I've been there. Like I told you, like, how did I get to where I'm at? Messing up a ton is how I got to where I'm at, but then also really being dedicated to learning and applying it to my life and to my businesses. And so, I think a lot of people turn away from the idea of, integrating, emotional safety and psychological safety into work because they think they're not qualified. And, honestly, all of us trauma survivors are really qualified on how to figure it all out and how to work together, especially, and if that's the culture that you want with your company and with your employees, they're demanding it, they're out there. Like you said, they're leaving the workforce. They're not going to tolerate anything less than, than what they feel like they deserve. And so now is the time really to kind of really look at policies and engagement and how you hire people and who you're bringing in and what your team dynamics really should be in order to get to your business strategy and to start to see how all of us are different and to integrate that awareness of our differences into how we team build and how we communicate and how we handle conflict and productivity and all that stuff. The resources are there and it can be done. And it's okay that not everybody knows what to do right now,
Yeah, I think that's a big one. People don't really know how to react right now to all of this. And there's no doubt there's a lot of feelings people have that they don't even know what those feelings are, and may not even know what to do with them right now. So that there's a lot going on. But yeah, I think it's excellent if companies really acknowledge the mental health of their employees and all that is really a part of everything. It should be anyway.
Yeah. Well, and I always say this, like you can choose to not apply trauma-informed leadership to your business, but your trauma is still there. You know,
yeah.
It's like you can choose not to believe in trauma, but trauma believes in you. It shows up.
Right.
It's there anyways. You might be trying to like overlook it or, hope that everybody leaves it at home with them. But, the other thing that I always think about too is, as a parent, my real mission, my secret mission, underneath all of this is that it's still happening today that 2 out of 3 children are still experiencing trauma at home. And I think about where does that come from? It comes from parents who are employees someplace. And when you look at how many hours we commit to our jobs every day, workplaces can be triggering and re-traumatizing. They can be toxic. They can be soul sucking and sapping. And then we send families back to each other with no resources to be the best that we can be or the best we want to be. And I think about, businesses and accountability on leadership to be able to say, listen, I know this is going to be hard, but I do see where we have a relationship in all of our community and the mental health of everybody. And when you create a work culture that's validating like that, your employees are going to feel like they trust you and they belong and they feel seen. And then their productivity is going to soar and you're going to hit your business results. I mean, the two things are linked together. You don't have happy people working in a company who don't show up and do their job. Like that never happens. You have unhappy people who show up and never do their job. But happy people, they bust it. They over deliver. They work together. They care about a passion. They're connected to the mission of the business, unhappy people aren't, so it does pay for itself to think that way.
I think in some cases, there's quality of life questions being raised now. I think that were there before, but maybe people are more likely to talk about them now.
Right. Well, the pandemic has just shifted the paradigm in so many different places and I think in really great ways. Not to dismiss the tragedy, that it's been and still continues to be around the world, but, actually giving people a chance to reprioritize and, and even for businesses that have followed suit with understanding like, wow, we can still do what we need to do and now rethink it, and how we did it. Cause we were just following along the same standard mode that's been set up for, a few hundred years. Like there was no reason to change the system, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, we broke it. So if you're going to fix it, you just don't go back. You're like, well, let's rethink how this comes back together again, and I think it's beautiful. I really do. I think that it's an exciting time, honestly, in business as unpredictable as it is. But again, that goes back to you asked me about, do I ever get afraid about starting over? No, this is the kind of stuff I love. There's a massive do-over right now. I'm in it.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out. So definitely those are good questions. I wish we could resolve them now, but I guess we can't.
No, wouldn't it be great? You and I would both make $1 million if we solved it all right now.
We'll take care of all those questions right here. Yeah, if only we could, but I guess we'll have to see, how this goes. But I mean, this is obviously a conversation we can continue to have. Before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts to share?
I mean, I thank you for asking me that, but we covered a lot today, in our chat right now. It's like, I feel like, we could keep running on and follow another path. Now I feel like, I think the big takeaway I'd like for people is, that are listening to this is, just, now is the time to be just more mindful and aware of really what's driving, us and to be aware, that, life isn't such an autopilot as we think it is, and that was one of my big life lessons is that, I must just be cursed. Like I have no control over what's happening next. And, I'm bad at attracting bad people and, bad situations and all that. And, the truth is especially if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to be in business for yourself, you have to have the ability to be able to question and call yourself out on your own BS. And to do that is okay. In fact, it's vital, to be successful. And if it's not okay right now for you to do it, that's okay too. This is something that, I highly encourage, for people to get comfortable with if they can at this point in time. And if they're not there yet, figure out why that might be the case. And again, like I always say, and when I talk with people, I just want everybody to realize that, we aren't born with the skills to make us amazing entrepreneurs. Those are things that we should have been taught, learned, modeled, shown. And if we didn't get all of them in some capacity or some sense of security and confidence, That's okay. We can get it. We can still build it into our lives. It didn't mean that we were born with a bad model, and I think that that's a big thing. I think compassion for ourselves is something that tends to be missing in entrepreneurship. And that's what I like everybody to leave with is, okay, be compassionate to yourself sometimes. You're going to do this. You'll be all right.
And I think that is important. And I'm sure that everyone's going to take that away and take that in and hopefully be much kinder to themselves when it comes down to their businesses and decisions and everything else that comes with that. So I want to thank you again, Ameé, for being on the podcast. You really shared so much good stuff, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too, Deb. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Please check out Ameé's book and her podcast and check her out also on social media. All those links will be in the show notes so you can connect with her and find out more about what she shared with us today. So once again, it's been Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host, Deborah Bailey. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to stop by womenentrepreneursradio.com to read extended bios of the show guests and also find links there for their websites and any offers that they have shared with you. And stop by our Facebook page at facebook.com/womenentrepreneurs.